What if your greatest enemy was the man who gave you life? Meet John Sinclair, a man broken by a childhood of abuse, raised by a father who saw him as nothing more than a punching bag. Now, after years of serving his country as a Marine, he must face the monster that made him. But as his past resurfaces, John learns the true depth of his father's darkness, darkness that threatens not only his future, but the entire world. John Sinclair's earliest memories are drenched in the harshness of his father's cruelty. Milton Sinclair was a man whose love for his son never existed. Instead, there was an overwhelming tide of violence and manipulation that John had to endure every single day. Milton was a man who thrived on control, and John was his favorite target. His father's fists were quick, his words venomous. There was no escape from his wrath. Whether John was 8 or 18, Milton's torment never wavered. The verbal abuse was constant, every conversation laced with demeaning remarks and threats. But the worst moments were when Milton would strike without warning. John learned early that silence was survival. Every time he tried to speak up, Milton's wrath grew more intense. The most painful memory, the one that haunted John for years, was when Milton killed the family dog. It wasn't an accident. John had come home one afternoon to find the dog lying lifeless in the yard, its eyes wide open in fear. Milton had simply decided it was time to make a point. John wasn't even allowed to mourn the loss. His father told him to stop acting like a girl when he saw the tears in his eyes, and that moment became the epitome of John's life under Milton's roof, emotionally and physically suffocated. John's mother, Evelyn, stood in the background, a silent witness to the abuse. She was a woman paralyzed by her own fears, too afraid to stop Milton's cruelty or leave him. She had once tried to stand up to Milton, but it ended with her being belittled and isolated. She loved John deeply, but was powerless to protect him. Her love for her son, however, was the only thing that kept John tethered to any semblance of hope. Even when Milton tore him down, Evelyn would comfort him late at night, whispering that one day he would escape this nightmare. But the years passed, and John's resentment grew. He resented his father for breaking him, and he resented his mother for not being strong enough to leave. Still, there was a flicker of hope. John vowed to himself that he would one day break free. The man who had caused him so much pain would eventually pay for what he had done. While Milton's tyranny weighed heavily on John, there was one person in his life who provided a flicker of light in the darkness: his mother, Evelyn. Though she, too, was a victim of Milton's cruelty, she loved John with a depth that was both her strength and her weakness. In a world where John felt powerless and trapped, his mother's support became his anchor. Evelyn could never stand up to Milton directly, but she tried in every way she could to give John the emotional foundation he needed. Every night, after Milton had gone to bed in his drunken stupor, Evelyn would sit with John. She'd gently stroke his hair as they sat in the quiet darkness of their home. These moments of peace were rare, and they felt like lifelines to John. In these quiet times, Evelyn spoke to John of a life beyond the walls of their house, one where he could be free from his father's grip. She told him he was special, that he deserved better than the life Milton had forced upon him. She encouraged him to study, to fight for a better future, to dream of a life where he wasn't just another pawn in Milton's cruel game. Her words were comforting, but they were also bittersweet. John saw the way his mother looked at him, her eyes filled with sadness, regret, and fear. She was too scared to leave Milton, too scared to protect her son the way she wanted to. But John understood. Her love for him was all she had left to offer, and it kept him going. Evelyn never showed it, but she believed in John's strength. She knew that one day he would find a way out, and when that time came, she knew he would leave and never look back. It wasn't just about escaping Milton, it was about John finding his own sense of self-worth. It was in these small, quiet moments that John realized how much he needed his mother's love, even if it was all she could give. But the question lingered in John's mind. If he ever did escape, would his mother ever find the courage to leave as well? This thought haunted him, as he understood that his escape from Milton's grasp might be his only shot at redemption. The day John finally left his father's house felt like a rebirth. He had been counting the days, waiting for the moment he could escape the suffocating grip of Milton. The violence, the cruelty, it had all become too much to bear. The young man who had once cowered under his father's reign had grown strong, both physically and mentally. But it wasn't enough. He needed more. He needed a way out, a way to prove to himself and the world that he wasn't the broken child his father had tried to shape him into. Joining the Marine Corps was John's escape. It was a way to leave his past behind, to sever the ties with Milton once and for all. It wasn't just about getting away. It was about becoming something more, something powerful. When John stepped off the bus at the Marine boot camp, he felt a mix of fear and exhilaration. This was the moment when he would forge his new identity. The strict discipline, the grueling physical tests, he excelled in every way, pushing himself beyond what he thought was possible. In the Marines, John found the structure and strength he had been lacking all his life. It wasn't just about proving himself to others. It was about proving to himself that he was worthy. The constant pressure and intense challenges pushed John to his limits, but they also taught him invaluable lessons. The bond he formed with his fellow Marines became his new family, and for the first time, John felt like he belonged. These men, his brothers, would have his back no matter what. In the field, when bullets flew and life-or-death decisions were made, John knew he was fighting not just for survival, but for the life he'd always dreamed of. A life free from Milton's influence. Years passed, and John served multiple tours in combat, each mission honing his skills, each day a step further away from the child his father had tried to destroy. But there was always a nagging thought in the back of his mind. His father still had power, and Milton's shadow would always loom over him. John's journey was just beginning, and though he'd escaped physically, the emotional scars were still there. But for now, the Marines were his new family, and they would help him become the man he had always wanted to be. Strong, independent, and free. When John returned home from his final deployment, he was a different man. The Marines had molded him into a fierce, self-reliant individual, someone who no longer feared his past. He had left Milton and everything associated with him behind. There was only one thing left: to build a life for himself, to create a future that was free of the chains his father had shackled him with. And for that, he thought he would need someone to share it with. He met Judy during a brief leave, a kind and supportive woman who seemed like the perfect partner. Her family embraced him, and for the first time in his life, John felt like he could have the normal life he had always wanted. But, as John quickly learned, the demons of the past never stay buried for long. Milton, the man who had destroyed John's childhood, was still lurking in the background, watching, waiting for the right moment to strike. John thought he had escaped Milton's reach, but he soon realized that was a fantasy. Milton wasn't done with him yet. It started with a phone call, then an unannounced visit. Milton had found John, and the war John thought he had won wasn't over. But this time, it wasn't John who was the target. Milton's manipulative control over people was far more insidious than anything John had ever imagined. He went after Judy, John's wife, like a predator after prey. Milton threatened her, using every tactic to break her down. He preyed on her vulnerabilities, playing on her fears and insecurities until she was no longer the woman John had fallen in love with. Judy became a shell of her former self, torn between her love for John and the twisted influence Milton exerted over her. Then came the betrayal, a gut-wrenching moment that John would never forget. Judy, The woman he had trusted with his heart made the unthinkable choice. She chose Milton. She sided with the man who had caused John so much pain, the man who had tortured him for years. The devastation John felt in that moment was indescribable. He had given his heart to Judy, had believed in their future together. But Milton had shattered that belief in the most unforgiving way. John realized that even though he had left his father behind physically, Milton's grip on his life would never fully loosen. The scars, both visible and hidden, were still there, and Judy's betrayal was a cruel reminder of the damage Milton had done to him. As John's life seemed to fall apart with Judy's betrayal, a new, terrifying revelation would turn everything he thought he knew upside down. His father, Milton Sinclair, was not just a cruel and manipulative father, he was a criminal mastermind, deeply entangled in illegal arms dealing and human trafficking. John had always known that Milton was involved in shady business, but he had no idea just how dangerous and far-reaching his father's criminal empire was. The discovery came through a shocking video sent to him by an anonymous source. In the video, John saw his father speaking with foreign figures, exchanging military-grade weapons in exchange for money and illicit goods. But what truly made John's blood run cold was the revelation of human trafficking, young men and women sold into slavery, exploited by Milton's network for profit. John had long suspected that Milton's business dealings were more than just shady. He was deeply embedded in a world of corruption and violence. But seeing the reality of it all through the video made John's heart race with fury. This wasn't just about family betrayal anymore. It was about real-world consequences, innocent lives destroyed by the very man who had tormented him his entire life. His mind raced as the pieces fell into place. Milton's operation wasn't just a small-time affair. It was international, involving politicians, businessmen, and even government officials. The enormity of Milton's reach was staggering, and it struck John like a lightning bolt. His father was a criminal on a scale that few could comprehend, and he was willing to do anything to protect his empire. John knew that his life would never be the same. This wasn't just a fight for his own freedom anymore. It was a war against the monster who had both broken him and created this vast web of pain and suffering. The video made it clear that Milton's power was not just over John and his family, it extended to international borders, involving criminal networks that could cause unimaginable harm. John's rage ignited, but it was tempered by a grim realization. This wouldn't be a simple confrontation. If he was going to take down Milton, he would need more than just his own strength. He would need allies, people who could help him navigate this treacherous world of crime and violence. The stakes had never been higher, and John was ready to fight back, knowing that he couldn't do it alone. As the weight of his father's criminal empire settled heavily on John's shoulders, he knew that he could no longer tackle this alone. Milton's vast network of influence reached into the highest echelons of power, and John realized that defeating him would require more than just personal vengeance. It would require an army. John reached out to former Marine colleagues, the few he trusted with his life, to form an alliance. These men, whom he had fought beside in countless missions, were more than just friends. They were his brothers. He knew that, with their help, he could devise a plan to take down Milton and end the reign of terror that had defined his life. The group was a mix of seasoned veterans, each with unique skills that would prove invaluable in the mission ahead. First, there was Marcus Max Stevens, a tech specialist who could hack into any system, gather intel, and make sure that their operations were smooth. Then there was Thomas Tex McCaffrey, a former sniper with unmatched precision, who would provide the firepower when things inevitably went south. And lastly, there was Ivan Iron Ivanov, a former demolitions expert who had an uncanny ability to make things go boom, skills that would come in handy when the time for destruction arrived. Together, they formed a brotherhood, bound by more than just their military backgrounds. They shared a common goal: to take down the monster that was Milton Sinclair. They trained together, planned together, and each member brought his unique talents to the table. But it wasn't just about the firepower, it was about ensuring that their actions had the right impact. John wasn't just going to take down his father for the sake of revenge, he was going to dismantle Milton's entire criminal operation, expose him for the monster he truly was, and if possible, save the lives of the victims Milton had exploited. But as the team began to prepare, John couldn't shake the fear that, despite all their planning, they were walking into something far more dangerous than they could have ever anticipated. Milton was ruthless, calculating, and well-connected. Even with an elite team of Marines, John knew that the odds were stacked against them. But he had no choice. He had to take action. His father had crossed a line, and there was no turning back. John and his team would risk everything to ensure that Milton would never hurt anyone again. The stakes had never been higher. The clock was ticking, and the mission had to be executed flawlessly. John's mind was racing as he prepared for the operation against his father, but nothing could have prepared him for the shock that awaited him next. Just when he thought things couldn't get worse, he received another bombshell. Judy, the woman he had loved and fought for, had become fully integrated into Milton's twisted world. The video, which had first revealed the extent of Milton's criminal empire, now exposed Judy's full betrayal. John watched in disbelief as Judy, now living under Milton's control, appeared in the video, not as a victim, but as an active participant. She had chosen Milton. She had submitted completely to his manipulation, joining him not just in business, but in a personal relationship with Abdullah, a powerful Middle Eastern man who was deeply involved in Milton's trafficking network. The video revealed Judy in a state of complete submission, a far cry from the strong, independent woman John had married. John's heart shattered as he saw Judy, his wife, willingly choosing this dark life over the one they had once envisioned together. It was a devastating blow. Judy, who had once been his rock, had become part of the very system that had destroyed his childhood. Milton had broken her down, just as he had done to John all those years ago, but instead of fighting back, she had embraced her place within his empire. It wasn't just a betrayal of their marriage. It was a betrayal of everything John had ever believed in. She was no longer the woman who stood by his side. She was now a part of Milton's world, an accessory to his crimes. The realization crushed John, but it also fueled his resolve. As much as he wanted to save Judy, he now understood that her betrayal was deeper than he had ever imagined. There would be no reconciliation, no coming back from this. Judy had chosen her path, and John's only option now was to move forward, not as the man who had once loved her, but as someone who had to stop the destruction Milton was causing. The emotional stakes of the operation had changed. This wasn't just about rescuing Judy anymore. It was about taking down a criminal empire and stopping the cycle of abuse that had ruined both his life and hers. Judy's betrayal only deepened John's determination to destroy Milton once and for all. The day of the operation had arrived. John, his team of former Marines, and an arsenal of weapons were ready to make their move. Their target was Milton Sinclair himself, along with his closest allies, including Abdullah. The plan was risky. Too risky, some might say, but John knew it was the only way to end the cycle of violence, exploitation, and pain that had defined his life. His father's criminal empire had to be destroyed once and for all, and the cost of failure would be unimaginable. The location was set, a luxurious yacht owned by Milton, a symbol of his wealth and power. The yacht was docked in international waters beyond the reach of authorities, and it was on this floating fortress that Milton would meet his end. John's team moved in quietly, blending into the shadows, making their way onto the yacht without detection. The mission was delicate. Timing was everything. They had to neutralize Milton and his guards without drawing attention to themselves before it was too late. Every move was calculated, every step taken with precision. But as they reached the inner sanctum of the yacht, Where Milton was meeting with his criminal associates, the atmosphere shifted. John saw Judy for the first time since the betrayal. She was standing by Milton's side, her eyes cold and distant, as if she no longer recognized the man who had once been her husband. She had a gun in her hand, pointed straight at John. The sight of her, now so far removed from the woman he had once loved, filled him with both rage and sorrow. Judy was no longer the person he had known. She was an enforcer, an extension of Milton's power. John had planned for this confrontation, but the reality was harder to process than he ever expected. Judy, now a willing participant in Milton's empire, was an obstacle he couldn't ignore. She was no longer the woman he had married. She had become a part of the system that had ruined his life. The emotional weight of the situation was unbearable, but John knew what he had to do. He couldn't allow sentimentality to cloud his judgment. This was about survival. This was about justice. The confrontation escalated quickly, with gunshots ringing out as the tension reached its breaking point. John's team was forced to take action, neutralizing Milton's guards while John faced his father in a final explosive confrontation. As the chaos unfolded around them, John captured everything on video: his father's crimes, Judy's betrayal, and the bloody path they had all walked. He needed the evidence. It was the only way to ensure that Milton would never hurt anyone again. And then, as the battle reached its climax, John activated the explosives hidden throughout the yacht. The explosion was deafening, sending shockwaves through the vessel. Milton's empire crumbled in an instant, as did the legacy he had built on violence and fear. The blast tore through the yacht, killing Milton, Abdullah, and everyone else involved in the operation. The nuclear device that had been hidden on the yacht detonated shortly after, sealing their fates and eliminating the threat once and for all. John walked away from the wreckage, the heat of the explosion still in his veins, but the weight of his decisions began to settle in. Judy was gone, lost to the man who had shaped her into something unrecognizable. His father, the man who had destroyed his childhood and ruined countless others, was dead. But the cost had been high. John knew that the emotional scars from this mission would stay with him forever. In the aftermath, John faced the grim reality of his actions. He informed his mother of the events, explaining how Milton's reign of terror had ended, and he reached out to Judy's parents, giving them the painful truth of her fate. Authorities began investigating Milton's extensive criminal network, and his mother, once a broken woman under Milton's thumb, rose to power within Sinclair Industries. She vowed to clean house, to rid the company of the corrupt figures who had enabled Milton's reign. John finally found some semblance of peace, knowing that he had destroyed the legacy of pain and abuse that had haunted him for so long. As the dust settled from the explosive showdown aboard the yacht, John was left to pick up the pieces of his shattered life. The mission had been successful in its grim objective. Milton was dead, the criminal empire destroyed, and the devastating threat had been eliminated. But the victory felt hollow. The price of revenge had been steeper than John had ever imagined. While he had exacted the justice he had sought for years, it came at the cost of his soul, his sense of self, and his family. The first call he made was to his mother. He hadn't spoken to her much in the years since his father had driven such a wedge between them. But now, with Milton gone, John knew he had to face the one person who had been a victim of his father's abuse just as much as he had. His mother was different now. She was stronger, empowered in ways she never had been before. As the matriarch of Sinclair Industries, she vowed to rebuild the company, to remove the toxic influence of Milton's old associates and create something new. For the first time, she was in control, and John was proud of the woman she had become. Still, he couldn't escape the lingering guilt that he had pushed her into a place where this was her only option. But the real devastation came from the loss of Judy. When John had first learned of her betrayal, part of him had held on to a glimmer of hope that she would somehow return to him. that the woman he loved would break free from Milton's control. That hope was dashed as the reality of Judy's choices set in. She had willingly aligned herself with the man who had tormented John's life, and in doing so had abandoned any semblance of the woman he once knew. Judy's fate was sealed in the explosion. Her submission to Milton's world had led her down a dark path, and there was no coming back from it. The emotional toll was immense. John had avenged his father's abuse, but in doing so he had destroyed everything he had once held dear. The woman he had loved was gone, and his childhood trauma, now full of bitter closure, had been shaped into something final. There was no joy in victory. The remnants of his broken family, the emotional scars, and the losses piled up. Even as his mother rebuilt, even as the authorities took control of Milton's criminal network, John was left in limbo, trying to reconcile the man he had become with the man he had been before the confrontation. John knew that the healing would be a long, arduous process. But for now, he had done what he set out to do. He had ended the cycle of abuse. And in doing so, he had broken free of Milton's shadow once and for all. Yet the bitterness lingered. As he looked to the future, John was uncertain. He had lost so much along the way, but he was also stronger, more resolute. He had become a man forged in the fires of trauma and vengeance, a man who knew that no matter how painful the past, the future was still his to create. After everything had been said and done, John found himself at a crossroads. The journey had been harrowing, filled with pain, betrayal, and the heavy weight of vengeance. But now, as he stood on the other side of his father's death, he realized that the one thing that had been elusive for so long, peace, was within reach. John's next step was to move forward, to find a life that was his own. But even as he tried to leave the past behind, the echoes of his journey remained, still reverberating in his heart. Judy was gone, and Milton's legacy had been eradicated, but the scars of the past would never fully fade. John could no longer be the man who let those memories rule his life. His first step was to sever ties with Sinclair Industries. Though his mother had risen to power within the company, John knew that it was a world that no longer held any meaning for him. He had taken part in bringing it all down. Now, it was time to focus on his own future. The military had given him discipline and purpose, and it was there that John felt the closest to who he truly was. His bond with his former Marine friends became stronger as they all moved forward, trying to rebuild their lives in the wake of so much destruction. John knew he couldn't go back to the man he had once been, but with his friends by his side, he began to heal. Then, in an unexpected turn, John met someone new, a fellow Marine who had her own painful past, but shared a similar resolve. Her name was Sarah, and her strength reminded John of the resilience he had always possessed but had lost sight of. As their relationship developed, John found solace in the idea that, despite all the chaos and pain, there could still be room for something pure. Sarah understood him in ways no one else ever had, and together, they built something that was grounded in trust and mutual respect. But John didn't forget what he had done or what he had lost. He knew that he could never truly escape his past. It had shaped him too profoundly. But he also understood that while the past had the power to define him, the future held the power to liberate him. The cycle of abuse had ended, and now John was free to live a life that was his own, a life where he could finally find peace, not through vengeance, but through healing. As John stood on the precipice of this new beginning, he knew one thing for certain. He would never let anyone, least of all Milton, control him again. He was free, and it was time to live for himself. Thank you for watching. Please like, share, comment, and subscribe for more gripping tales of redemption and strength. Your support means the world to me.